works. Okay, we're recording now. All right. Okay, let me share my screen and we will get started. Okay, so an overview of what we're going to talk about today. We will go through, we'll define trauma and we'll talk about how it affects a person's brain, body, and their behavior. We'll talk about what is trauma-informed care. We'll discuss trauma resiliency and working with trauma survivors. And then lastly, we'll try to dedicate at least 20 minutes to this at the end, but we'll talk about how you take care of yourselves while working with trauma survivors, which I think is probably one of the most important parts of our training today. All right, so we've got SAMHSA's definition here. Does anyone want to read the definition? You're going to hear Brandon and I talking a lot today. So anyone feeling up for reading the definition?
Individual trauma results from exposure to an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's function and physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. SAMHSA.
Thank you. So essentially you have a negative event which can lead to a harmful experience and it can have lasting effects. Brandon, you want to take this slide?
Of course, of course. So there are several different types of trauma. There's interpersonal, chronic and complex, accidental, direct and indirect, acute, political and systemic, racial, intergenerational, and vicarious. Typically we want like an example. Does anybody have an example of interpersonal trauma?
It could be like domestic violence, intimate partner violence.
Yep, it's a good example. We've got a lot of examples right now of political and systemic trauma in our society, right? Sorry, someone was someone have a comment?
Oh, maybe there's something going on in someone's personal life, like death in the family or divorce or right.
Yeah, definitely all of those things.
Chronic and complex traumas. Anybody got a good example of a chronic and complex trauma?
I think about like molestation over years or, you know, physical abuse within your household over years. And
Yeah.
I think the complexity may be from several different individuals.
Yeah, yes.
I think of like somebody who's in the system, foster care system, maybe experienced abuse or maybe even medical trauma.
It's a good example. And that could also be potentially some systemic trauma as well with that example, Jacqueline, yeah.
About some accidental traumas.
I'm waiting because I can't think of like accidental. So somebody give me an example.
A car accident could be traumatic, I guess.
Yeah, like work accidents, things like that. War.
Good examples. What about intergenerational? What do you all think of when you hear intergenerational trauma?
Immigration.
Immigration.
Slavery in the United States.
Sorry, say that again.
Slavery in the United States.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say. It reminds me of something that my mother would pass down to me because of her bias or her experience.
Right. Yeah. And slavery in the United States as being a systemic part of that trauma as well. Yeah. And then vicarious trauma, we're going to talk about at the end of our training today, but has anyone ever heard that word before? Anyone want to take a stab at defining it?
I think that's like, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna, I believe that's when someone transfers a trauma onto you inadvertently. You might witness something or someone might confide in you about something.
Yeah. So all of us here are susceptible to experiencing vicarious trauma, also known as caregiver burnout, right? So you all are working with trauma survivors. So you're going to hear trauma stories, you're going to be exposed to trauma. Homelessness in itself is traumatic, right? So vicarious trauma is developing symptoms and sort of side effects of trauma without actually going through it yourself. Okay. So trauma is an event that overwhelms the person's perceived ability to cope. It debilitates them through a central loss of control. It creates the necessity for psychological defenses, and it can be stored in the body, causing physical sensations, reactions, and chronic health conditions. What psychological defenses, what do people think of when you see psychological defenses? What does that bring up for you? People know what a psychological defense might be?
Are you referring to like the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses?
That is great that you bring that up because we're going to talk about that a lot. Fight, flight, or freeze is actually really part of our primitive brain. So it's not a defense that kind of like we go into it now. We don't really have a lot of control over it.
Mhm.
Psychological defenses you might not have control over either, but these are a little bit more complex. So things like denial or projection, right? Like maybe someone is upset with something about themselves, but they project it onto someone else in that relationship. So they start getting upset with the other person. So something like things like that.
I would
What
say even as
about-
case managers, we get in front of that all the time when a client is not having, something's not going the way that the client had hoped. It automatically becomes the fault of the case manager when, it could have just been something that they were late for an appointment or so, they do project onto us quite a bit.
It's a good example, Brandon. You're late to my appointment. No one's ever there for me on time. You've abandoned me. So might not totally be about Brandon, but maybe about some trauma that person experienced in early life. Yeah.
Is shutting down and just not wanting to deal with it a psychological defense?
Definitely could be. Yeah.
Mhm.
So dissociation or shutting down, numbing, all things could be potentially psychological defenses. And we don't always have control over those, and they're really meant to help us survive. So the whole point of psychological defenses, even things like denial, were really put in place by our brain to help kind of protect us, because experiencing the trauma directly is really hard, right? Causing physical, mental, emotional stress and strain. So those defenses are really there as a survival mechanism. But what can happen is after that initial trauma is over, the defenses can persist, causing problems with relationships or things like that. So has anyone ever seen an example of that? Brandon, you had a good one with the case manager one, but any others that people are thinking of? Okay. All right, we're going to start off this training with a video today. It's called Remembering Trauma. I'm not sure if any of you have seen it. It is the longer training of the longer video. It's about 12 minutes. So I'm going to share my screen in a second, and then we'll have some time at the end of the video to discuss. And if someone can just say, hey, can confirm that they're seeing the video and hearing the sound verbally, that would be great. Can we see and hear?
Yes.
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 Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Hey, she doesn't want to talk to you, man. She doesn't want to talk to you back. Oh my God! No! No! Stop it! Stop! The officer! Leave me alone, man. Stop it!
I don't understand what you were thinking. Tell me exactly what happened.
Nothing.
Nothing. Doesn't look like nothing. You know I have to submit a report to the judge.
Who are you texting?
Texting a friend. What do you care?
Let me see your phone.
I'm not gonna let you see my phone. It's my phone.
I don't want to violate you, Manny, but this doesn't look good. What were you thinking?
It's not as simple as it's like
Are you stupid or something? Let me see your phone. Yo, Mario, what's up?
Come
here.
Hey
man, why don't you leave her alone? I was thinking, I gotta do something.
Well, you sure did something.
Hey, she doesn't want to talk to you, man. She doesn't want to talk to you, man. What are you gonna do about it, huh? Oh my God! No! No! The officer! Leave me alone, man. No!
Still working at home? Then you need to have video conference lighting.
Sorry
I've
for
been
the
working from home for
ad.
about a year now.
Stop it!
Are you using again?
No.
Is that what your drug test is going to tell me?
Yes.
I've known you for a while, and I believe you're a good kid, but your anger could be your undoing. So you've got to do something about that.
It's not as bad as it looks.
You told me this wouldn't happen again.
I know.
Did you get busted again?
No, it's all good. Don't worry about it, babe.
I told you. I don't want my baby around anyone who's violent.
It was just something stupid. I don't even know what happened. I would never hurt our baby.
How am I supposed to trust you? You just broke the one promise you made me. You know I don't want him to grow up with parents like ours.
What are you talking about? You had it easier than I did.
I'm serious.
I'm sorry. Look, all I'm saying is that I'm not like your old man, okay? I can be in control. Can I hold my baby now, please?
Go clean yourself up. I don't want blood on our baby. Manny, bring out a new diaper when you're done.
Manny! Give me some water! Hear me talking to you, boy?
Give me some water, hurry up!
Manny, diapers, please.
Don't make me get up! Hurry up! It's always something with you, you stupid! You retard! It's always something with you, I want that kid anyway, you're fucking
Manny, did you hear me?
Hey, bud. Seems like you've been having a hard time. Do you want to talk about why you've been getting in fights? Not getting along with the other kids in your class?
How's school, Manny? Good. It was good. Did you do anything fun? No. Is that boy still picking on you? No. Good. Did you tell him who's boss? Manny, wait up. You have to stay close.
Manny! Manny! What's up, man? What's good, bro?
Those boys are idiots. Don't hang out with them.
Also, I've heard that you've been having trouble paying attention. Focusing on your work? Would you be willing to tell me what's bothering you?
Hey, what's good, Manny? What's going on, my man? How's it going? How you doing?
Leave my brother alone.
Hey, girl, how you doing? Where you going? How you doing? Yeah, where you going, huh? Hanging out with my boy, Nick.
Manny. Manny. Manny, you're not in trouble, okay? I just want to know what's going on.
Fuck off.
Where you going, huh? Where you going?
Oh my God! Manny!
Hello? Oh, hi. Yes, thank you so much for getting back to me. Yeah, so the reason we're recommending testing is we're kind of confused with what's going on. I mean, he's such a sweet kid, but he just seems to be having so much difficulty functioning. Yeah. Okay, I mean, he is hyperactive. His teacher keeps coming to me and, telling me about all of his learning problems. She seems to think that he has ADHD. But, at other times, he just seems to go off into another world. I'm just starting to wonder if it's maybe something developmentally. Yeah, but I mean, then there's other times when he just explodes and gets aggressive. I'm just starting to think that maybe given his family history that it may be some form of bipolar. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to get back to me. I hope this helps inform your testing. Okay, thanks.
Florals have always been a major source of inspiration for me. I grew up with my dad, who was an avid gardener.
Bye.
Look, I know you love your kid, and that's a beautiful thing. But you have to start working on making better choices if you want to keep on being the man of your house. And that's real talk.
Maybe I shouldn't even try anymore. Maybe they're better off without me. I'm just gonna screw up like I have my whole life.
Maybe you will, and maybe you won't. But you owe it to your son to try. He's going to be your age one day. And what do you want him to think when he looks back and remembers his dad?
I don't know what's wrong with me. I get really angry sometimes and nothing can calm me down. I don't want to be this way. I have a beautiful girlfriend and a son at home who I love. I just want to protect them from everything. And I've heard it all. I have conduct disorder. I have bipolar disorder. There's probably not much you can do to help me anyways. But people keep asking me what I'm going to do about it. And I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do about it because I can't get any help anywhere. And I've tried all the different meds. And the fact is that they just kind of numb me out, but they don't really help me get over anything.
Manny, we're gonna do our best to make therapy different this time. I'm interested in what happened to you as a child and helping you understand that there can be a connection between that and all these behaviors you've had, and you getting all these labels over the years. You know, when a child grows up in a house like you did, oftentimes they come up with ways of dealing with things to help them survive and cope with all that's happened before. I want us to understand together the connections between your behaviors and reactions, the difficult things you've lived through, and why you may be behaving and acting in these ways. If it's okay with you, I want us to work together to see what we're going to do about this.
I'm sorry for breaking my promise. I'm gonna work on getting better, okay?
You gotta think about your life, Manny. Think about all the good things you've accomplished. Just work on making a better life for our son.
Oh my gosh, look at that. They are completely gone.
I love you.
All right. Initial thoughts on the video? Have some follow-up questions. I'm going to put them in the chat. Then we can look at each other when we answer. Just nicer, I think. Has anyone seen that video before? No. So these questions are kind of mushed together in the chat, but the first one is, how do we see Manny's childhood trauma show up later in his life? Does anyone want to try to answer that one?
Aggressive behaviors, withdrawal. Sounds like he had substance abuse issues. Legal trouble.
And that desire to protect women, right?
I think him seeing his, is that a vicarious? I don't know which one that is, but I think him seeing his mom be abused when he was younger made it kind of like normal for him to protect women and or be an abuser.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that was direct trauma in this case for Manny because he was reliant on his caregiver, right? And the home was dysfunctional and chaotic and there was abuse happening. So I would imagine, you know, witnessing his mom experience abuse probably also made him concerned about his safety if there wasn't already direct abuse happening to him. Yeah.
One thing I just real quick, the one thing I this is my third time kind of round with this training, so I do enjoy actually rewatching things because I do get to pick up on, you know, I get to notice things or things pop out to me at, you know, different times. And, you know, it really speaks to almost the systemic issues where, and I don't know if you've all seen it, but there is a TED Talk from a beautiful author called The Dangers of a Single Story. And in it, you know, I just see how he is just pinned as being angry and just making poor choices. And that's, you know, that's where the problems stop. And you know, you probably see it with, you know, it's implied with the court, but you see it with the parole officer. And I don't know, I just think that's just really interesting. Instead of, you know, he's clearly not getting the help that he deserves. And he's just clearly just being labeled as just angry and just makes bad choices. Instead of trying to figure out, and I just think it speaks to a much larger problem within some of the systems that we have to try to gatekeep or mitigate these things.
Yeah, and then they wanted to try to give him a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, which you can't even diagnose in someone under the age of 18, right? So, and that's a pretty heavy diagnosis that comes with pretty heavy duty medications, a lot of stigma, when really it was his trauma.
I think it was kind of like they also gave him the label of being a drug abuser. Nope, there was no like evidence in the video. People were accusing him or asking him, but no like evidence that he was actually using drugs. Like they just gave him the label trying to figure out why he is the way he is instead of really trying to dive into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the probation officer was, I imagine, I think how I interpret it is he's like going through some substance use treatment and they're like testing his urine because it says, I don't know, who knows? There's a lot of information we don't have. But regardless, that person was focusing in on the substance use, right? The outcome instead of like what happened to Manny to cause him to react in this way. Yeah.
It seemed like when he was like discussing like his issues or whatever he felt was going on with them, like it didn't really seem like they were listening at all. Or really trying to find like, well, maybe you're bipolar, maybe you're this. It's like he was saying all of it, but not getting like a solution to everything that was going on or clarification or any like guidance to help him be, you know, help him get through that.
Yeah. Yeah. Focused on the label and less on the why. Yeah. So there's a lot of good things about this film, but I think there's a lot of problems with this film too. And we want to talk about that in here. Did you all see any implicit biases show up in the film, or what did you notice in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in terms of power differentials and things like that.
I mean, you have it listed in the chat, but I did notice before it was there that the 2 mental health providers were white women, and all the people we saw having problematic behavior appeared to be Latinx people.
Right. Yeah, it's a problem. It reinforces the white hero stereotype or, problem. So, yeah. Okay, and then the last question, which interventions, so we haven't talked about trauma-informed totally in-depthly yet, but what interventions do you think so far were trauma-informed? And then also, were there any interventions that you think were potentially re-traumatizing or not trauma-informed?
I think the therapist kind of explaining to him what she wants to do and try to make it different than his previous experience indicates she may have had some trauma informed, but who knows how reliving that would have impacted him too. So I don't know. I feel like she was trying.
Yeah, her approach felt a little bit more collaborative, maybe than the other approaches, and more, a little more empowering too, potentially. Yeah.
I think the interventions that were re-traumatizing were the depictions of Manny as a child when he was being sort of misdiagnosed as having bipolar.
Yeah.
I was thinking of like when the parole officer was speaking to him and he sounded more accusatory, which sounds like the pattern his father had with him is like, what's wrong with you? It's always something with you. And that's kind of like the approach the parole officer was taking.
I was 400% going to say the same exact thing, but I was also going to add to piggyback onto that, even when his girlfriend was scolding him after he got back. And then when it connects to him being scolded as a child, like all of that's like very re-traumatizing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also I love that the therapist asked for permission. Like that was always my favorite bit.
I was going to add something just a little bit different to that part with the parole officer. Yeah, the first part definitely. I think towards the end, though, his conversation was an intervention in itself because he said he did understand him as a person, but then also bringing up his family and his son because was really a big part of him wanting to make those changes or even be a better example. So I think that was helpful. It's probably not always the traditional model, especially people who are in those positions or, with the systemic racism and things like that play into that. But I think that was definitely transactional in his intervention.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny doing this training because there's always the probation officer, people are always kind of on the fence with him because there's some things that I think were really effective. He was that kind of tough love a little bit, but they definitely, in looking at the video, they have some sort of connection, they have some sort of relationship. So him giving that feedback was probably meaningful. Yeah. All right, thank you all for participating. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here. All right, we've got our first poll question. So I just launched the poll, so go ahead and cast your votes, and then we'll take a look at the answers. Okay, we're split. So the question is, a person who has experienced trauma will always have a memory of the event. This statement is true or false. So we're almost 50-50. 45% said true and 55% said false. The correct answer is false. So someone that's experienced trauma, their brain, we're gonna watch short videos shortly that kind of shows what happens in the brain when someone is experiencing trauma, but the parts of the brain that are responsible for holding on to memories, collecting memories, that part kind of starts to dysfunction in trauma. And so a person cannot, often a person can't recall details or memories of the event. So that's pretty typical for someone that's gone through trauma not to have a lot of memory or remember specific details of the event.
I have a question or statement,
Sure.
I guess. So just to put it out there, I voted true that they will always have memories. And your response didn't kind of say, it didn't say we'll always have accurate memories or we'll always have.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean? Like it wasn't.
Yeah, I'm gonna edit my question because that's a really good point. Yeah, they'll always have some.
I feel like there's always going to be some type of memory, even if I don't remember the event itself or details about the event. There's going to be something.
That's right. Sometimes there actually won't be a memory at all. But I am gonna edit my question to make it a little bit more specific. That's a really good point. But there are cases, there are examples of situations where someone has no memory of the event at all, and then they get into therapy and start asking questions maybe that are starting to kind of go at and then jogged and they remember. So that can happen. Specifically in like developmental trauma. So when someone is like around the age when memories are forming, they could have a trauma that happens and they have no memory of it until later in life when something kind of jogs that memory and it kind of comes out. Which would be a terrifying experience to have, right?
No, and I would also add that in at least my experiences with, kind of looking into some of this stuff, I think one of the things that makes trauma so unique as a thing is that we don't get to record what's traumatic to us, right? That's just something, and I think sometimes this is why it's harder to possibly recall it like offhand, is that our brain is the one that does all the recording of the trauma. And so we don't get to make that decision. I think sometimes why it is trickier, or, you may kind of realize years later that the event was actually traumatizing to
Traumatic,
you.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Brandon. Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking actually of a client that I have that I'm doing that I've done the therapy with, that in talking about, they had an idea of what their traumatic event was, and then in talking through more in therapy realized, oh, wow, a lot of what I experienced at home with my dysfunctional family and chaotic, family was actually really traumatic. So it wasn't until we kind of were able to label that was, that there was some neglect that happened, that they were able to say, okay, that was actually pretty traumatic what I went through.
And on that, I do want to just add, because just even in my own experiences, I've noticed as I worked through a lot of things throughout the years, a lot of the things that I thought trauma had happened turned out really nothing had happened. And the things that I thought were like just the normal, like, oh, this is how families are, ended up being the way more like traumatic experiences in my like later teen year. I thought all of my trauma was like in my, formative years, the, K through 12, the K through 5th, 6th grade or whatever. And it really didn't take hold, that a lot of the trauma didn't really even start hitting me mostly until like my junior high school years. I was just an average, boring child, K through 6th grade. So
yeah. All right, so we're gonna watch our next video, which is a video on trauma in the brain, which will kind of explain a little bit why we're not able to remember specific details sometimes when trauma happens. Not what I want to do. Okay, here we go. Can we see it we see and hear okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
We need to take a statement so we can establish what happened on Saturday night.
What time did you get back to David's flat?
What time? I don't know.
Can you give us an estimate?
I don't remember.
Would your pals remember what time you left the club?
He seemed nice.
She didn't remember much, did she?
I know. And now we've got to waste more time on a daft lecture. We know how to deal with victims. We've had years of experience.
Well, some of us have had more years than others.
I'm in my prime, I'll have you know.
That'll be right.
Today's session is about trauma. The latest in brain science will help you in your work. I'll start with a tour of the parts of the human brain. The reptilian brain maintains basic bodily functions. The limbic system is also instinctive. It deals with fear and pleasure. For example, you pat a dog, it senses pleasure, and without thinking, wags its tail. The neocortex is the site of logic, imagination, planning, and control. It's more sophisticated, but because it's conscious, it's slower than the older parts of the brain. The amygdala is a key part of the limbic system. It has one job: to sense danger and set off the alarm. When it's a matter of survival, the primitive parts of the brain override the conscious part. There are 3 possible survival responses: fight, flight, or the one that people don't think of, freeze. When the alarm goes off, blood and oxygen are diverted to muscles, adrenaline floods the body, and all systems that are not crucial to survival are switched off. Normally, the job of the hippocampus is to file memories so you can retrieve them later. But in times of danger, it stops filing memories, which makes it harder to gather evidence later on. Instead, the hippocampus switches to pumping cortisol. What's useful about cortisol is it stops us feeling pain, so we can focus on survival. Can anyone give me an example?
A farming accident where a man carried his own arm for a mile without feeling any pain?
Yes, excellent example. It is an evolutionary safety mechanism, which is fast and instinctive. In essence, it's our body's very clever way of protecting us. To recap, an example of the 3 parts of the brain working together. You're standing at a bar. Your reptilian brain is keeping your heart beating. You're enjoying the pleasure of a nice pint with your limbic system. You're using your neocortex to work out if there's time for another before the last train. What could happen to make the amygdala kick in? What if this happened? The way you'd respond would depend not on your logical brain, but on your instinctive brain. Being glassed in a bar would be a traumatic experience. Who can give me another example of an event that can cause trauma?
War?
Rape?
A car crash?
Good, yes. Trauma occurs when a person is overwhelmed by something beyond their control. The survival brain takes over the rational brain. It can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, with symptoms that last at least a month. Vicarious or secondary trauma is something you may experience if you deal with incidents such as rape or sudden death, or think of Lockerbie, Dunblane. You're not superheroes. Having a brain makes you all vulnerable to secondary trauma. It's important to understand that when trauma occurs again and again, it can become complex PTSD, such as in domestic abuse or child sexual abuse. The alarm system in the brain becomes jammed. Memories are stuck in the limbic system, so a trigger can set off the alarm. The trigger could be anything: a color, a smell, a sound, a sensation. Now, the indicators of trauma. What should you be looking out for?
Depression. Crying a lot?
Yes, that's one response. And at the other end of the spectrum, total numbness.
Nightmares? Flashbacks?
Stress.
Good, yes. And they may feel sick. Also, shame, feelings of guilt, inability to enjoy sex. Social isolation, triggers. People often feel overwhelmed by the symptoms of trauma. This can lead to using alcohol or other drugs to block out memories, or self-harm, or dissociation when a person's mind detaches from reality. Indicators can be specific to the type of trauma. Say, dental problems, when someone who was orally abused avoids going to the dentist. A victim of abuse might bond strongly to her abuser. This is known as traumatic bonding, or Stockholm syndrome. And jumbled up memory, when a person's normal recording of memories doesn't work. Can you recall any times you've seen that symptom?
What time? I don't know.
A traumatized person may not seem like her usual self, or may be hypervigilant, on edge, or being startled by everyday things. Everyone is different. You never know what impact trauma will have. Symptoms can change from day to day. So what does all this mean in practice, in your job? A traumatized person's brain is protecting them, but that normal human response of self-protection can get in the way of evidence gathering. The US military has developed new trauma-informed interviewing techniques that you can use to work around this. Research shows that if someone seems vacant, they could be distracted by their traumatic memories. Try to ground them by asking a simple, non-patronizing question such as, "Are you thirsty? Do you want a glass of water?" This can help bring them back to the here and now. Don't expect a logical, linear story. Ask, "What can you recall just now?" Find out what the victim physically felt or saw. Working this way, from the instinctive sensory parts towards the logical parts of the brain, you'll get more results. In conclusion, 4 things for you to take away. Trauma response is the brain in survival mode. Repeated abuse can make trauma symptoms worse. In response to trauma, people will behave in unexpected ways. Remember, trauma is a normal human response to abnormal events.
All right, so flash quiz. What is the part of the brain that is responsible for having people have jumbled up memories or lost memories? Does anyone remember?
Oh.
Pop
I know
quiz.
it releases cortisone. I know that. I just
That's
don't even
right.
know what the piece is.
That's right.
The amygdala?
Yes.
Is that what it's I missed it.
Wait, now I'm like, is it amygdala or the hippocampus? I think it's actually the Oh my gosh. We need to go back and watch the video. I
need to take notes this time.
I may have failed my pop quiz. Okay. I believe it's the, I thought it was the hippocampus actually. Okay. I'm sorry for the boxes too on the, when I have the chat pulled up, I forget that. That. All right. Brandon, do you want to talk about this slide?
Good. There we go. So yeah, this is trauma causes a variety of symptoms and side effects within all of us. And so here is a chart of a lot of, there's the traumatic event in the beginning, in the middle there. And a lot of various symptoms and side effects will be nightmares and flashbacks, intrusive memories, startled responses. Colleen, could you maybe minimize the video window so I could see the rest of the little black box? Well, I can't necessarily see the video,
yeah, I know. Okay, yes, hold on.
I'll go around the other side. Hopelessness, decreased concentration, insomnia, numbing, loss of interest, irritability, depression, dissociation, hypervigilance, or no memories, self-destructive behaviors, substance abuse, eating disorders, chronic pain or headaches, emotionally overwhelmed, panic attacks, or shame and self-hatred. I will say one of the things that really stood out to me, what made me realize that I had experienced probably more trauma even in my life than I had anticipated, was the first time I sat down through this training and going through a list of these. I was like, oh, I kind of checked off all of those in my 20s. So that was, and so a lot of them, you know, they will pop up in different ways in different times. But yeah, so those would be the symptoms and side effects.
I'm gonna pull my video panel back up so I can see your faces. Okay, I did confirm. I second guessed myself. The hippocampus is what stops, what is responsible for filing your memories. So that's the pumping cortisol. Amygdala, also super important part of this. That's where your fight, flight, or freeze response comes from. So the amygdala and the hippocampus are your two big players in the brain. Has anyone seen any signs and symptoms and side effects in working with clients or in themselves or loved ones? Has anyone ever seen any examples of this that they want to share? Thank you, Brandon, for sharing yours.
Yeah, no, it was a Rolodex. It's a trauma Rolodex.
So fun.
I have plenty of examples, but when I read the top of it, I'm thinking about symptoms and side effects of life. I don't know why I just keep putting that extra piece on the end of it, because who doesn't have some sort of experience, you know? And what, you know, how we think about what's normal, like a normal response. I don't know what that is, because everybody is different, and what may be small to me could be huge to the next person because of their previous experience.
Definitely. That's a really good point.
There are plenty of experiences.
Yeah, and most of us have experienced some sort of trauma or know someone that's experienced some sort of trauma. And I would say that percentage is probably higher among us, right? Because we are in a helping profession. Probably got into this field because we have some experience with trauma, whether directly or indirectly. So another reason why it's really important, going to be really important for us to talk about vicarious trauma and how we recognize the signs and symptoms of that, because guess what? They look the same as this. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was one thing that when Keisha was speaking, kind of, I guess, I don't know if it needs to be said or should be said, but I guess all of those signs and symptoms wouldn't necessarily indicate like 100% indicator of trauma, but definitely like a good spot to start digging to kind of find out if that would be, you know, a sign or symptom of trauma. Because I feel like sometimes I look at those lists and I'm like, oh, cool. And so when I see a client like exhibit them, I'm like,
experiencing it, right.
And I'm like, well, maybe they're just having an off day. Maybe something else is kind of causing the irritability or the, you know, disassociating for the day. I don't necessarily think it always has to tie back to trauma, but I definitely think it's a good starting point.
I think about the individuals that have been in prison for years and how it's a long-term traumatic event. And they can't adjust to just like, I don't want to say regular everyday experiences, but yeah, like regular everyday experiences, they react and respond differently because of that long-term trauma.
Right, and they're basically they have to kind of remain in that survival mode because there's potential for them to get harmed by their fellow inmates, by the prison guards, by the system, by whatever, right? So they're kind of in that fight, flight, or freeze response all the time.
All the time.
Same with our population, right? Homelessness in itself is traumatic. So I would say, I don't have statistics, but I would say probably most, if not all of our clients have experienced trauma before experiencing homelessness, and then homelessness compounded that trauma in itself, right? So we're gonna just assume that most of our clients have had some significant trauma histories. Yeah. All right, we are at our breaking point. No pun intended there. So I realized when I said that sounded a little bit dramatic, didn't it? Dramatic and traumatic. So we will take a 10-minute break. I have the time on my desktop as 10:02. So how about we come back at 10:12? Does that sound okay? All right. You can stay on the Zoom. You can leave your video on. You can turn it off, whatever you want, but you can stay on this. You don't have to log off from the training to take your break. All right, looks like most people are back. Hope you had a good break. Hope you didn't have a breakdown. All right, let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, so we are going to move into talking about trauma-informed care. Brandon, do you want to take this slide?
Not seeing the slide?
Sorry?
Not seeing the slide?
Well, probably because I didn't share. Let's try it again. Hold on. We're not on that slide. Ah, the joys of Zoom. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Trauma-informed care is by far one of my favorite things. I was thrilled to find out that the agency kind of operated with this. And to be entirely honest, I didn't really even know what trauma-informed care was when I first started. But in the interview, of course, I said yes. Trauma-informed care is kind of a cultural shift of, you know, we saw this in the video as well of the what's wrong with you versus what happened to you. Power over somebody versus power with. And I do believe we do see a lot of agencies, you know, outside of our own that use the power over versus power with. And I think this agency has done a pretty wonderful job. What made trauma-informed care easy for me was essentially just don't make assumptions about somebody. No matter how they're responding to you, just ask questions. What's going on? Do you like this apartment? You know, really just anything. Just I make, you know, personally how I've applied it to my life is I don't make assumptions about anybody's state of mind, where they're at, what they've been through. And so it allows me to ask questions. Perfect example would have been one of my clients who recently had a baby. When she told me she was pregnant, my first response was, how do you feel about that? Because it could be a traumatizing experience. Had I just been like, oh my gosh, congratulations, a baby. And it was a baby she wasn't ready for. It was a baby she wasn't quite sure if she wanted, but had family pressure, you know. So there's a lot going with that. But what it is not is a free pass. It's not a free pass for them to, you know, for the client to kind of walk all over us as a doormat and for us to just accept well, they've had trauma. The way I like to see it is kind of like physical therapy. In physical therapy, they really need to see what your range of motion is first. But ideally, physical therapists don't always just want to stop at your range of motion. So we do try to figure out where the client's at. We work with them collaborative using, you know, creating a safe environment and, you know, and all that. And so, but what we do with trauma-informed care is create a safe environment for them to be a little uncomfortable so we can really improve that range of motion over time.
Thank you for that example, Brandon. I love that analogy. All right, I'm going to launch the next poll. Okay, cast your votes. So this is a multiple choice, so you're picking 6 of these choices. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So 100% of you said safety, which is correct. Safety is one of the 6 tenets of trauma-informed care. There's some sneaky ones on here. Flexibility is not one of the tenets, but I do think that flexibility is kind of part of trauma-informed care, so I do think it's important. Reactivity would not be one. Reactivity would be, how I think of reactivity is sort of like putting a Band-Aid on the problem, or instead of being in a preventative state, we're reacting to the problem, so we're trying to get like a quick fix. Trauma-informed care would really want to move more towards a preventative approach so that you're not in that kind of reactive mode where you're just trying to do quick fixes for things. Permanent housing is not one of the tenets, but I would hope that we are implementing trauma-informed in our department. All right, so we're going to take a look closer at the 6 tenets of trauma-informed care next. Okay, so these are our 6 tenets of trauma-informed care. Hopefully you all have seen this sign posted somewhere in the agency. Maybe you have it at your desk. If you don't, you're going to get a handout of this, so you could totally post it at your desk after this training. We did not develop this. This was developed by the South Bay Community Services Center. That's where I received my trauma-informed care training. I went down to a training in Chula Vista, California several years ago and got a really in-depth training on trauma-informed care. So they developed this, but we have modified it and used it with their logo and our logos on it. So anyway, so we've got safety, trustworthiness, choice, empowerment, collaboration, and language. So safety, trauma-informed care is really about creating both the physical and emotional safety with clients, but also with each other. And if you're supervising staff, with your staff. So trauma-informed care doesn't just apply to clients. I want to be clear on that. I think everyone on this training today is client-facing, meaning you work directly with clients. But everybody across the agency is getting this training, and not everyone in the agency works directly with clients. But that's okay. You can still implement the tenets of trauma-informed care and work from a trauma-informed care perspective. So this is really meant to be a perspective that you can apply to your work with clients, but also your work with your coworkers, your work with your staff, your work with your supervisor, your work with the community. So really trying to implement these tenets across, all facets of our work at the agency. So safety, we want to make sure that we have a physical and emotionally safe environment. So as a supervisor, I try to think about safety in terms of making sure that I have privacy when my staff come to meet with me, safety in terms of making sure that I'm setting regular supervisions with my staff. So we're not only meeting like when something bad is happening, right? We meet on a weekly basis. I want them to feel supported in supervision. I want the environment to feel pleasant. I want to be, I try to not answer any phone calls or look at emails during that time. I want them to feel like it's a safe place where they can come and share how they're doing. Trustworthiness. So lots of different components under trustworthiness. Transparency, boundaries, follow through, consistency. Cultural consideration you're going to see is on every single tenant. So that's a really important piece of this, right? We want to take into account someone's cultural background. We want to notice if there's privilege or power dynamics at play and take those into account and talk about them. We're not going to ignore that they're not there. We want to recognize that they're there and talk about them. Choice, trying to find choices whenever we can. We might not feel like we have a choice all the time, but if there is any opportunity for us to infuse some choice with each other or with our clients, that can help us feel a lot more empowered. I think of an example, the same example every time we get to choice, where I think this was a really good example of a trauma-informed approach. I had gone out into the field to assess a client for hospitalization and determined that the client did need to go to the hospital. I was with another case manager. And so we were transporting the client to the hospital. We get to the hospital. She had some thoughts of wanting to hurt herself, not in a good place, right? So she walks in. The hospital was pretty chaotic that day. She's a client that identifies as female. She had some sexual abuse early in her childhood that had kind of gone into adulthood, unfortunately. Was feeling pretty raw that day. And the majority of people in the hospital were men. There were a number of people, there were like a couple people that were handcuffed and sitting in the hospital. It was just a pretty chaotic day. So we get there and they're checking her in, and the first thing they ask her to do when they're checking her in is to take off her clothes so they can check to make sure she doesn't have any paraphernalia or whatever. And they're putting, they asked her to, you know, dress in hospital scrubs. And the only nurses available were male nurses, and she was feeling particularly triggered. So myself and the other case manager were both females and asked the nurse, hey, is it possible if we go? And so the nurse had to watch her undress. Humiliating, vulnerable experience for anyone, right? And so she said, can we go in and be the people that are there while she undresses? Thankfully, the nurse was receptive to that. Neither choice was great, right? Like, who wants to undress in front of somebody? Neither choice felt really great, but that felt like a safer choice for the client at that time. And I think it was a really good move by the case manager to recognize that this is something that we could do that would make her feel a little bit more at ease. And I do think it kind of helped change the trajectory of that hospitalization for her. Empowerment, collaboration. So you can see kind of the parts of those underneath each tenet. So really thinking about teamwork, equal partnership, shared power. We saw that in the video with Manny, right? The therapist at the end said, I want to work on this together with you. So she was really trying to create some equal partnership and some shared power. Language, the last one, really important, I think. So when we think about the language we use, we want to make sure that we're using respectful, positive language, and that we're coming from a non-punitive and non-demanding place with people. None of us here were trained, probably not. I know I was not trained from a trauma-informed perspective. Our society tends to be more punitive. That's the approach that most of us have learned. So we're really having to retrain the brain with trauma-informed care, and trying to come from more of a non-punitive approach, I think, is easier said than done. Watching your tone and body language, right? Language is not just verbal language, but also body language, your tone, whether you're paying attention to that person, all of those things are at play.
And I just want, for me, language is definitely the most important one, because it does tie into all of the other tenets. And I'm just speaking more from my the client caseload I kind of inherited, which, some of these clients have been clients since the 80s. And so some of their experiences, in shelter care in the 80s, probably, trauma-informed care, well, I don't know how long that's been a thing in practice, but their experiences weren't so positive, and it wasn't so much that it was a negative experience. It was a lot of the times how they were spoken to. And even those little, I think it's really important to remember just some of those comments you feel might be innocuous and nothing that can be very encouraging or discouraging to the kind of re-traumatizing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that point. Okay, Brandon, do you want to talk about this slide?
I would love to. So this is another one of those things. I forgot what we call this, the arrow. What is this?
This is the Echo arrow is what I call it, but it came from Echo Parenting and Education, who's a community-based provider. This is where that resource came from.
But you'll also see this a lot. I believe we will email you a copy of this, so you can also print this up and have a million fun trauma-informed things in your cubicle or at your desk. But this really is kind of just transforming how we think and the different ways how people are not trauma-informed care, and how you can change it to something trauma-informed care like Power Over and Power With, and that's kind of that collaborative piece. I think one of my favorite ones, and I probably should have glanced over this. Well, one of my big ones is the need to know basis for info and transparency and predictability. I am really transparent. So if I don't know something, I just say I don't know. Or if something happened, you know, sometimes I have defaulted to just like, well, I was approved for this earlier, no longer. Like I don't just try to default to like, I know best. Us versus them, where, you know, that's a big one with the client facing, because they do feel that there's a lot of traumatization with our clients within the system. So really understanding that you're there to support them in their decisions, no matter what they are, even though sometimes they're not decisions we would want for them. And then I'm here to fix you, supportive healing. What's wrong with you? What happened to you? And so I mean, you can kind of look over the list. And is there any of these that stand out to anybody as like that one's really neat, or like an aha moment?
I like it. I think trauma-informed care shows empathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like the helping versus learning one, because we're all helping professionals, right? And we all got into this work to help our clients or to help staff. But there's a certain position that you're in when you're going in as a helping person. And if we could change that to going into as a learning person, right? Like I might learn something from my staff. I might learn something from my client. It equals the playing field a little bit, right? I think so often we can go into a relationship with a client or a staff or each other and kind of want to make sure that they're checking off the boxes on our agenda, right? Making sure that we're getting things done. And that adds another power dynamic where we kind of forget that we could learn something from that other person.
Even on that. Oh, no, go Keisha.
I'm sorry. I like the fear-based versus empathy-based. I think that, you know, we all have, and that's another part of just working with this company, is that the very first training that, you know, kind of stuck with me was the bias training. And, you know, we kind of we come with our own bias. So when someone starts talking about something, it's like grounded in fear in me, because I'm not comfortable with what you're saying. But to have the empathy-based training kind of be implemented, it kind of like, it's a different side of it, where I'm still not trying to be judgmental, just have a little bit of empathy and, you know, compassion for their experiences.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I like the one that stands out is the behavior as communication. That one like kind of like really stood out to me on the chart.
I was trying to pull it back up. You were saying the behavior as communication.
Behavior as communication. It just, when I read that one, I was like, oh, I never really thought about that, you know, but if you look at someone's behavior, and they may not be using a lot of words, but it shows like a lot, you know, that maybe they're going through something. You know, sometimes people show their behavior and they don't talk about it. So just kind of being observant of how someone's acting on a day-to-day basis with their clients.
Definitely. Yeah, I love that one too, because I think for so many of our clients that had, so what can happen when you have trauma that happens in your developmental formative years, you can kind of get stuck where that trauma happened. So a lot of our clients and a lot of people that have trauma during that time might not have the capacity to express themselves verbally that well. So a lot of their expression may come through their behavior or their actions. So reminding ourselves that that behavior is really just another way for them to express their feelings. I think that can be hard when we're encountering someone that's yelling a lot or making decisions that are unsafe or dangerous, you know, or we might want to put a lot of judgment to those behaviors, but if we're reminding ourselves that this is maybe another way for them to communicate, that can take some of the personalization out of it.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up the last one, people are bad, and then people have different lived experiences, or consider all lived experiences.
Definitely, yeah. And we might be labeling someone as bad without even realizing it, right? This is where that implicit bias work that we all need to do comes in really handy, because we're not aware of our implicit bias. We've got to do that work on our own. We've got to really examine what are our core beliefs that have come from our experience and who we are, and are those core beliefs accurate and true? We've got to really examine those. This is a handout, another handout that's in your handout group, in your handouts. So it's a little bit bigger if you look at your handout, but practical applications. I think this is a nice handout because it gives some more tangible examples of how to implement trauma-informed care. I think trauma-informed care can feel a little bit nebulous and a little bit gray. It is pretty gray. So I think it can get hard to talk about what are we doing here? What are the tangible things that we can do? So it breaks it into some categories. The first one is office setting. So making sure that an office setting and a building is accessible, right? Can everybody get into your building easily, accessibly? Is there inclusive signage? Is the seating comfortable? Is there quiet space or an area where people can feel like they can have some privacy? Doing intake and assessment with clients. We've got to move through our intake and assessment process, which is usually a lot of questions that are pretty intrusive. So can you give some choice into how they answer those questions? Maybe reminding them that they don't have to answer every question right now if they're not comfortable with it. They can take a break. Offer them choice of seating, explaining how the information will be used, really going through informed consent and confidentiality. I'm going to go look at the bottom one with staff. So I want to recognize too that all people leaders at the agency, so this is anyone in management, so myself and anyone that supervises anyone at the agency has to go through People Leader Academy, which is I think it's a 12-week training session. And one of the modules is trauma-informed care supervision. So we really go into a lot of in-depth training on how to implement trauma-informed care in supervision. So looking at this bottom one, making sure that your supervisor is not shaming or coercing, that you're present and genuine with your staff, working to create an authentic relationship. Any on here that people particularly like or hadn't really thought of before?
I like the implementation of this for the staff. I think it really humanizes, the agency that we work for, instead of just us being employees. It shows like a shared investment in our well-being. So
you just read my mind, sir.
I think as providers, we're assumed that we have it all together all the time. So not assuming. And that kind of goes along with one kind of small, but I think it says like tolerate a range of emotions from participants. And I think that's because like you don't know where that person's coming from. We don't know what's happening for them in their own personal lives, but we expect them to come and to perform and to be present for our clients. But, like in supervision, like we need to be present for them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I've been doing these trainings for a while now, but I still think about myself as being on a trauma-informed journey, that I have made all of these mistakes and more. So remembering, that we are humans too, right? And we're not going to be perfect at implementing this because none of us were trained in this way. This is a different way of thinking about things. I think the trustworthiness tenet rings true for me with this one, because when I have made mistakes in the past, I think the most important thing that I did in that moment was to take ownership for it and to come back and have a follow-up conversation with that staff and say, hey, I really didn't like how I handled that conversation with you the other day. I think I made some mistakes in how I communicated it. I'm sorry, and this is how I would like that conversation to go differently in the future. And is there anything, else that you want to, thankfully, I've had staff that have been able to give that feedback to me and say, hey, Colleen, like the way that we talked about that situation was it didn't feel really good. So that tells me, okay, good. They feel safe, coming and sharing that with me. And how can I take ownership and make sure that, that we can have how can the repair happen a little bit, right? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move into talking about trauma resiliency. So the good thing about our brains is that they can change. So if you've experienced trauma and you're having signs and symptoms of trauma, it does not mean that you are stuck there, that you're going to stay there forever. And I think our clients are excellent examples of survival, resiliency, perseverance. So our brain, we can develop new neural networks in our brain. We can change patterns of behavior. We can change how we function. So how do we work with trauma survivors and how do we become part of that resiliency? All right, we're going to watch another video. I will not pull up my chat or my boxes with your faces, even though I hate not seeing you, but hopefully there won't be any black boxes on this next video.
And just real quick with the trauma resiliency, while you get all that set up.
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially client facing, maybe even staff facing. I'm not a supervisor, so I can only speak to my experiences with client facing. But I think it does help to remind the clients how they've been resilient. I think that's a beautiful part of the process, because a lot of our clients just, I'm sure you'll hear we're just doing, I just did what I had to. I just did what I had to get out of the situation, and not really conceptualizing like the amount of work that they put in, either from shelter or going to the street to be homeless for a year, doing the bank statements or whatever it is their process was. So I do think that's just an important piece to it, is reminding them how they've been resilient.
Yes, I agree. Great point. Okay, this is Tonier Kane. She is an advocate and a speaker. She's done a lot of work in the prison systems with speaking about her recovery and advocacy. So we will watch this video.
Well, as a child, I was sexually abused. Married off to an older man at a very young age, experiencing domestic violence. I was a victim of neglect and abandonment by my mother. So I was always treated like I was worthless. And this is how things supposed to be happen in my life. And I needed to find a way to cope with my reality. I mean, at age 9, I was experiencing sexuality that you're not even supposed to. Who do that to a 9-year-old? Moving into foster care, taken from foster care by my mom, just so she can marry me off to an older man who beat me constantly. I needed to find a way to cope with that, or I would have killed myself. And I used drugs and alcohol to do it. Unfortunately for me, it introduced me to different public health systems. In a mental health institution, I was always thrown into seclusion. One of the worst things you can do to somebody that's a victim of neglect and abandonment. One of the worst things, because that's how I was always treated by my mother. And now you're gonna do it? So when someone come with their tray of medication or tray of food, I smacked it out of my face, because the only thing I know to do is to tap into my survival mode, because no one has taught me to do anything different. No one has identified, addressed, or treat my trauma, so I do the only thing I know to do, and that is to tap into my survival mode. And my survival mode has always told me to fight, because I didn't know there was any other way. So I did what I had to do to cope, and sometimes somebody might got hit with the tray when I smacked it. So now they're calling a code and they're throwing me down to the ground, restraining me, a rape victim, holding me down and restraining me. Somebody that has been held down and raped multiple times, doing more harm, causing more trauma, but because my chart says that I'm a crazy crackhead. The stigma, that's what they go by. That's what they go by. And unfortunately, I was re-traumatized, taking me even further away from the possibility of healing and recovery. I was a desperate child, still trying to tell somebody what happened to me. Still trying to find somebody safe enough to tell what happened to me. You know, we go to these facilities and they give us these tidbits of good information, but most of us have so much trauma packed so tightly, the bits and pieces of information can't get down there to get rooted. We got to get the stuff out of us so we can get the good stuff in us, so we can change our belief system, because once our belief system change, our thought process change, and we start to make the best decisions in our life. We can't do that if you still believe that we're a crazy crackhead. 2004, I was in prison with my daughter, and I was terrified I was about to lose another baby. I didn't know how I was going to do that. And they kept telling me about a program that addressed your trauma and help you with your addiction and your mental health. I said, well, I'm all those things, and I'm pregnant. And but you know what? I still didn't really have that. I didn't have high hopes. I did it because I wanted to keep my daughter. I didn't do it for anything else, because they sent me to so many different programs, one where I was court ordered and the drug counselor raped me. So how do I believe that anything would work? Really? You court ordered me to a program where I graduated and I was doing well, and then when I went back for aftercare, the counselor raped me. So I really didn't have high hopes after 19 years of going in and out of the systems that I could do better, but all I could see was me trying to keep my daughter. And when I walked through the doors of Tamar's Children, somebody said, I'm so glad you're here. After 19 years of people shaking their head in disgust at me and just saying, you're just a crazy crackhead, and hurting me over and over again, somebody told me they were glad to see me. And yes, they did. They dug deep and they worked with me one-on-one to help me to deal with what happened to me, not what was wrong with me, but what happened to me. And they did it right, and it was a one-stop shop, because understanding that I was homeless, they made sure I had a housing grant. They made sure somebody was attached to the housing grant that came out and visit me once a week to help me to create a budget and make sure that I was taking care of the property and my daughter. And I was okay with that. Some women say, oh, they all up in my business. I needed somebody to be up in my business. And they weren't judgmental. They understood. And they helped me, truly breaking the cycle, because that's what the real picture is about. Yeah, treat my trauma, or, remove the stigma to keep me out of your system. Yes, love that. But did you know that doing that was going to break the cycle for my daughter? She would be able to be given what she was given as a result. So we look at a whole different path from here on out for my daughter and her kids and their kids. I got to understand that it's a lot to do with what happened to an individual and how people were raised up or trained up. And then I could understand my job is try to educate them to remove the stigma, to understand the impact that trauma has on the individual. So instead of taking it on that, oh, you guys are awful. Well, don't get me wrong, I tell them when they're awful though. But I also know that where there's breath, there's hope. Where there's breath, there's hope. Everybody has room to get better. I'm a living proof of that.
Pretty powerful, huh? Follow-up questions that I am going to put in the chat, but any initial reactions to that video or to Tonier?
I like what she said. Where there's breath, there's hope.
Yeah.
Because I think so many of our clients feel a sense of hopelessness, especially when they're struggling with some pretty severe mental illness. There's, they feel hopeless, and then the people that work with them feel hopeless. But I love that.
Simple, but so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I think about how trauma-informed care should be implemented across the board. I don't know if that would ever be a real thing, but her experience in the hospital, I think about how their approach would have maybe helped her sooner rather than later. Maybe it would have been 12 years instead of 19 years, of her being re-traumatized over and over again if the professionals had been introduced to this process.
Yeah, it's hard not to think about that. I put some questions in the chat. When she was at her turning point, what did staff do that was helpful? What did you hear her say?
I think I actually had the opportunity to hear her give a keynote address in person a couple of years back, which was fantastic. And one of the things that stuck with me most is just every time someone did or didn't treat her like a human being and more as a problem to be solved and to be sorted into a different system rather than acknowledging that humanity. And part of what she talked about in that longer talk was the ways that we cut off our own humanity as a coping mechanism. And that's true for both people who are experiencing trauma who might be clients and also for service providers who are experiencing vicarious trauma, cutting off our own humanity, and because of that, not allowing ourselves to recognize the humanity in others and how that becomes its own cycle. And so just like that simple thing of like, I'm happy you're here, how are you doing? And just always coming back to that, like every single client you're seeing is their own human with their own story and complexity. And by not acknowledging their complexity, you're cutting yourself off from your own complexity and vice versa.
Yeah.
There
Really
was
well
something-
said, Heidi. Thank you.
No, and that was beautiful, Heidi. It actually made me think there was, and I cannot remember the name of the human being that said it, but it was in one of my textbooks, and it was, she said, who would we not love if we only knew their story? Which, as you were speaking, I was like, this is like what had been going through my head as far as, just rehumanizing the experience, moving away from the head and into the what happened.
Yeah. How do we help shift a person's belief system about themselves? So this says client's belief system, but also maybe a coworker, maybe if you're supervising, maybe your staff. How do we help shift the belief system? What did you learn from this video?
Well, I think sadly to say, one of the first things that I think everyone should have is integrity when we're serving our clients. I think based on what she spoke on, that she was re-traumatized just based off asking for help. The systems that, I think someone mentioned earlier, the systems designed to help her actually weren't helping.
Yeah. And she experienced abuse in that system too.
Mhm.
So something as simple as just being consistent and showing up and doing no harm, big interventions that we can do to shift someone's belief. Yeah.
I think when people started offering her real assistance, of course, her motives were, she just wanted to keep her daughter, but at the same time, it was more focused, and she said it was more focused on what happened to her instead of what's wrong with her. And it just helped her to start changing her mind about how she felt about herself.
Yeah, definitely. The last question is, what are some things, subtle day-to-day things that are currently in place in our system? So that could be in our system as an agency, our system as society, we could take it any way, but what are things that are currently in place in our system that may re-traumatize people?
I said this in we had our weekly supervision, and it was kind of like seeing trauma replayed over and over again in media.
Yeah.
It's like re-traumatizing over
Totally.
and over and over again.
Yeah.
It's on repeat.
Yeah.
And I also feel like, it's almost as if people kind of, even though it may be traumatizing, it's comfortable, so they gravitate towards it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, I'm trying to figure out a better way to say it, but like you seek out the drama.
Yeah. I mean, how many times have we now watched the murder of George Floyd this week, over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and how traumatizing that is. Yeah. And there's no escape from the media, right? So I think, we turn on our phones, it's there. We turn on the TV, it's there. It's everywhere. So yeah, I think about how much that is just like hurting our brain, to bear witness to that over and over and over again. Yeah.
And another way I see it play out with a lot of our clients is the structure, and this is both legal, when we're looking at legal, housing authority, whatever, the quote unquote black and white structures that they try to set up, these very strict, okay, you get in if you get this, you don't if you don't do this, without really acknowledging that our clients have a variety of different, needs, traumas. And so one of the ones that I see time and time again are deadlines. Like those hard deadlines of like, you either do this or you don't get services. I actually got into an argument with one of the CBEST people because I have a client who's, a little more phone challenged, but with those abominable phones, sometimes it takes a little while. I think you have to wait like another month before you can get another one, those little government phones. And, I had mentioned this to the CBEST. She's like, oh, well, she can just go to the corner and, she can just get a phone from anyone, they've got them all over. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, I never thought of that. And so I went back and forth with her on a little bit on that. And I was just like, okay. But yeah, so, I think, there's a lot of ways that our very kind of black and white system doesn't allow for any of the spectrum of colors that happen with our clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is where it gets tricky to implement trauma-informed care, because we have pressure from competing systems and things that we need to do, right? Like, and how do we, so I think, I'm thinking about an example of a client that I just linked for FSP services for mental health, and they were getting ready to close the client out because she hadn't engaged. And they're like, they have to make those decisions because DMH is telling them to, right? Like, they are under the pressure to make sure that they're checking off those boxes in order to keep that client open in the system. So I think one thing that I tried to do is just really to build that relationship with the provider early, to kind of give her some of the background of that client, help her understand kind of why there was some delay in their interaction and their engagement. And so I think that helped keep the client open a little bit longer because I knew that she needed to document something, right? And so if I could give her a little bit more of that information. So sometimes it's figuring out ways to work within the system, right? Like maybe the system needs to change and needs a total overhaul. But in the meantime, are there things that we can do as providers to help help things be a little bit more trauma informed?
Yeah, I think building off what you said just then is about sharing as much transparency as we can with our clients, because there are things about the system that we as providers have to adhere to that we may even be able to acknowledge, like, hey, this is messed up, how rigid it is.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry that we have to stick you with this deadline, but unfortunately, these are the options we have. I think it sucks too, you know, just like being clear, because that I think is part of that sharing power rather than holding the power over, is being as transparent as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of that power with and that collaborative approach, like, man, this sucks. Like, this is really frustrating, you know? What kind of options do you think we could take to figure out a different approach to this? Yeah.
I use that one all the time, Heidi. I don't know how many times I've just been like, I don't know. Like I used to work retail, so there's part of me that's like, oh no, it's corporate. I can't do anything. But like I do think a big piece of it is empathizing with the clients, how frustrating the system can be. Because it doesn't feel like, oh, it's just you guys, the system versus me.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. So here are some tips for interacting with trauma survivors, and I'm sure you all have other tips that you have accumulated over time in your work. But these are some big ones that we want to try to remember to do when we're working with trauma survivors. So staying calm, easier said than done some days, right? So I think for me, the biggest awakening that I had through my trauma-informed care journey is really, it's so simple, but it's so important, is really trying to tap in with myself where I am that day and honoring that experience. So before I have a difficult conversation with a client or a staff, really taking an inventory with myself first. You know, am I anxious today? Am I tense today? Am I feeling some resentment? Am I angry? Where am I at? And is there something that I can do to kind of get myself a little bit more grounded before I go into this conversation? And if there's not, maybe I need to reschedule the conversation to another day or another time when I have that ability to kind of be a little bit more present. But if we go in not in a calming way, or not in a, I think less calming, but more really just a mindful way, right? If we go in and we're not in that state, we don't always have the outcome that we're seeking.
I think one thing that helps me, at least a tip for staying calm, is let the client know that the conversation, if it's client based or even staff facing, just letting the person know that the conversation we're about to have will probably be very uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable for me. So I'm assuming it'll be uncomfortable for you, and really kind of setting the precedence that it's going to be an uncomfortable situation. And at least it lets them know what to brace for. And I think it's like that psychological trick of like asking somebody like, oh, don't let me have any of this. You may not ask them to like ever have it, but now your brain's already wired that you're not like going to do that. And so that's one of the things that I typically do with all of my clients.
Yeah, that's a great, see you bringing in the tenets of safety and collaboration, trustworthiness, all of those things. Yeah.
I think that helps them understand that, how you were saying, they think because we're case managers and we have this position that we have it all together. Like, we're human too. And I absolutely feel or empathize with what I'm about to say, or how this might make you feel, or how uncomfortable it might be. So I think that's a good thing too.
Definitely. Yeah. The next one is assume your client has a trauma history. So like we were talking about earlier, homelessness in itself is traumatic. And I would say probably all of our clients have experienced some trauma prior to entering into homelessness. So they don't need to be specific about what their trauma history was. They don't need to say, hey, I have a history of trauma. We're just going to go ahead and assume that there is a trauma history there, because that's going to change how we're interacting with that person, right? It might not be the most trauma-informed thing to have your client spill their trauma history to you necessarily, right? Like if you are helping them get into housing and maybe they're linked to a therapist, it's, you know, having someone spill their trauma history to multiple people, that may be traumatic in itself. And we often encounter clients that want to do that, right? They want to kind of trauma dump, and it might not be the safest thing for them, because if they're leaving your office and they don't have those tools in place for how to sort of self-soothe, it could be potentially dangerous, right? Because they're ripping open this wound, and maybe they don't have the tools or the supports in place to kind of help self-soothe or sort of navigate that. Trying to ground them. So we saw that in the video about with the brain. So something as simple as offering them a seat or some water, that could make all the difference if someone is starting to kind of dissociate or doesn't seem, you know, like they're totally there. That could be a simple way to try to bring them back down to reality. Listen to their concerns. So simple, right? But I think like so hard sometimes when we have a million things going on. It can be hard to really tune in and listen to what the other person is saying. But people know when you're not listening, and they know when you're not genuine. I think our clients especially are people that have experienced a lot of trauma. They've developed really advanced survival skills to help them tap into quickly, whether someone is listening to them or genuine or not. So they're going to be able to tell pretty quickly if you're not genuine. So if you're not in that space to do that, really recognizing that and kind of taking the time to get there. Asking.
They'll call you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say they'll definitely call you out on it.
Yes, as they should, right? Yeah, sorry. Again, I can't see your faces because I've got the screen on. I didn't mean to do that. So if you have something to say, chime in. Thank you, Jacqueline. Being aware of safety, yours and theirs. So making sure that, you know, someone that's experienced trauma is going to be very aware of where the exits are, where is the safest place to sit. So they're already probably screening for that, but also making sure that you're doing that too. Are you having maybe it's a difficult conversation that you're about to have, making sure that it's in a safe place for you and for the other person. Remembering that they're in survival mode. So that fight, flight, or freeze might be taking over. So I think too, sometimes I see this play out like when I'm supervising staff too, right? Like someone might come in, I might have a staff that came in and that just dealt with a really difficult client situation that made them maybe feel unsafe, and they're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. If I'm not recognizing that that's where they are, we're going to have a very different conversation that's probably not going to be helpful for that person, right? If I'm not taking into account that they're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, like they're not going to be able to have a logical conversation with me right now. We're not going to be able to debrief the situation or problem solve. The first thing we need to do is kind of get their nervous system sort of in a calmer place. Setting expectations, being transparent. We've talked a lot about this already, which I appreciate. So important, right? We want to be really clear about what we need, what we want to accomplish, how we're going to collaborate to do that in an effective way, and also being really transparent about what the limits are. We might not be able to do certain things. So being really clear that that's not a choice might feel really hard to say, important to say, because if it's not a choice, we don't want to set the other person up for failure. That goes along with not making promises. Don't make promises you can't keep. We might want to make all the promises. We're going to get you housed, you know, in 2 weeks. The client wants to get moved into housing in 2 weeks and we want to really make that promise. We're going to make that happen for you. Might not be really realistic, right? Because we've got barriers from the housing authority. We've got to find a place. There's a lot of things that even if we tried as hard as we could, that there's going to be some barriers that we don't really have control over. So being really transparent about that process in the beginning, being consistent, being aware of your emotional state. Anything else that you all have done in interacting with trauma survivors that you find to be particularly helpful?
There's a thing called code switching. I think it goes back to being aware of the language you use. So communicating with them in a way that they may be more receptive to. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thought about that too. Being a sounding board, of course, but then also being able to help them be more comfortable. And I don't remember what training I was sitting in, but she said, her client was more comfortable if she threw a couple of F words across the table every now and again, and it helped her relate and be more open and, comfortable with the situation. So sometimes you gotta kind of fall into that.
So kind of being real and authentic and what that means, right? For you and for that relationship. Yeah.
I was going to say front loading, like kind of preparing them, like, letting them know like when an appointment is or something like that. So they can also kind of like mentally prepare themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always like when I go to the doctor's office and they tell me what they're going to do before they do it. Feels a lot better, right? Because the front loading, right? Like I know what's going to happen during that appointment. And especially if there's been if someone that has experienced some physical or sexual abuse, going to a doctor's appointment can be an extremely triggering event, right? So, and if they're going into the doctor's appointment and not knowing like what's going to happen next, that could be really, really triggering for our clients. Okay.
An inspection too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 Okay, we're going to go into some breakout groups. I think I'm going to divide the groups into 3. So you're going to have a pretty small group. Before I do that, I'm going to put the vignette. So we're going to talk through, you'll talk through the vignette in your breakout groups, and there's some questions. Sorry, seeing a message from Heidi. Sorry you're having internet problems, Heidi. It's the worst.
It's all good, thanks.
We've all been there. Okay. So everyone can see the vignette in the chat, I hope.
Yes, ma'am.
There are some follow-up questions. So I'm going to divide you up into 3 groups, and then when you're in the group, you'll want to take a look at the vignette and then try to answer these questions. So there's 3 questions. How do you intervene with the client? How can you integrate choice and empowerment? And how would you describe her behavior in the incident report? So the incident report would be like the report that you're writing for the agency, or you could also say maybe you're doing a note, like a client encounter note. We could use that too if you're not familiar with incident reports. So we'll take about, let's see. I think we can take 10 minutes in the breakout groups to talk through this, and then we'll come back and I'm going to pick one group randomly to kind of report out. So you don't know who it is, so make sure you do the exercise. This is my little keep you on your toes method. So when in your group, just pick one person that's going to be your report out person. So just make sure you identify someone to take notes and get the report out when we all come back together. Any questions? Is that clear? Okay. All right, so give me a minute just to put everybody into rooms. Okay, here we go. Brandon, it looks like you're going to be in room 2. So I'll try to join one of the rooms. Brandon and I will just be flies on the wall. All right, here we go.
feel the emotions that you're angry, but let's problem solve together. Let's think about like, how can we, you know, maybe not be able to recuperate your phone, but if you need to make an important call, like, you know, let's look for a phone, or, you know, you can use my phone, you know, just be able to just be there for them.
And then
It says, how would you describe her behavior?
Yeah.
As far as her behavior, I mean, I would definitely, it depends, like how, I'm very like cognizant over documentation purposes and like how you're, you know, wording things in language. Cause like, you know, you can phrase it two different ways. For this, for me, I would say, I would probably start off of what happened first versus what I'm seeing, or, you know, what I'm assuming I'm seeing. So I could say something like, at 2:45, I noticed a young lady coming in the room. I walked over, you can describe actions. I noticed a young lady coming into the room. She seemed to be looking for something. I came to ask her what was going on. She was definitely upset about her phone coming up missing, and, you know, whatever happens from there. But, you know, keywords like, you know, angry or out of control or wild or what's the word? Yeah, just I can just imagine, you know, some of those labels being put. But yeah, especially since we're considering that she's Jamaican, that
Right, the
you know,
cultural
right, the
sensitivity.
cultural sensitivity, like, you know, you're saying you're talking with hands, but I'm actually, I mean, you can't see it right now. I got my video turned off, but I'm talking with my hands too. So, you know, those things are very, very important when you're saying like the description part and behavior, because what made me, you know, me just
Hey, Colleen, we've kind of hit a dead end in our our brainstorming.
Okay, were you able to work through the questions?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
we
talked
did.
about a few things.
Okay, cool. All right, I think the other group is just wrapping up. So I'll broadcast a message in a minute to let people know they've got a couple minutes left. Okay.
Thanks.
To jump to conclusions that somebody just took it. Maybe a staff saw it and thought, oh, somebody's like, maybe they saw her put it there, and or like maybe they thought, oh, well, if it gets left there, it's definitely gonna be taken. So let me put it in my office and charge it in my office. And then maybe forgot to tell somebody. So instead of just like, I guess, coming into the situation with assumptions that, oh, it was just stolen. And just, you know, validate the client, but also, like we're saying, is, you know, trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, because that's part of like offering her like different options, like yeah, to explore different options and whatnot. So I kind of like what you said with that. And it'll also calm her down too, because then she'll start thinking like, dang, like, okay, I don't know, maybe it's not stolen. Maybe we need to like figure out where it is. So it could potentially calm her down a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's good. Because I feel like sometimes the clients we work with are going to be so fixated on something that's going to happen to them based on maybe like past experiences or past trauma, that even just offering like an alternate solution would be kind of like shake them out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they have been slighted so many times, I'm sure. That's why I say, even if she stated, if she like maintains being escalated, you know, I think us just remaining calm is so important, because maybe that has happened where somebody has taken her phone before many times, or, you know, she's had that happen to her, then I can see why sometimes they stay that way, why they feel that even if you're being the most logical person and offering them choices, they still stay as.
Welcome back. Almost got everybody back. Give it a minute. All right, welcome back. I think we have everybody. All right, so the group that I randomly picked, I believe it was group 2. People in that group were Leslie, Keisha, Abigail Reyes. Do y'all know which group I'm talking about? Yes.
Yes, that was our group, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about a couple of things. A couple of things that came up for us. Just starting off with intervention. Some of the big things that we talked about was how we actually are approaching the situation initially. So like, even if it was something that we were observing from, a certain distance, how we were like walking up and even trying to figure out what's going on. So a little bit more detail on that. We were saying that we should really try to focus on like the facts and trying to see, get her to understand that, hey, we're here for support, to listen to her first, and then going from what she's saying. And that can involve helping her retrace her steps, helping her just trying to understand the situation a little bit more. And then a little bit going into empowerment and approach, or empowerment and choice. We just talked about after that support is given or established, kind of focusing on the after part. So if that's connecting her to, or if that's saying, hey, we can actually fill out a report, we can, I don't know if you would tell her to observe cameras, or if we can either follow up and get her like connected to her phone if she needed to contact someone, because it was mentioned, or her anxiety was mentioned as a part of this scenario as well. And then we kind of talked about her behavior and being careful in how we like label things. This is important because in the scenario, it mentioned her using hand motions and being very exaggerated. And she's Jamaican. So with this, I think about cultural differences, and we talked about some of those things, and how just, for someone wanting or needing to express themselves can be intimidating to others, just depending on how it sounds to, versus on how somebody else takes that. So we said that we need to make sure that in this report, it's very important how you're labeling things. And then it is said that she has anxiety. So making sure that we're not like overlooking that and considering that as the trauma-informed care.
Great. Thank you. Sounds like your group had very rich discussion. So thank you for sharing that. All right. All right, everybody. We're getting there. We've got about a half hour left, so which leaves us a good time to talk about how we can take care of ourselves when working with trauma survivors. So very important. All right, we're going to launch the last poll question. Here we go. This one is multiple choice as well, so you can pick more than one answer. All right, it looks like most people have voted. The correct answer is all of them. So all of these are true. So it's vicarious trauma is the profound shift in worldview that occurs in helping professionals when working with trauma survivors. Compassion fatigue is the profound emotional and physical erosion that takes place when professionals are unable to refuel and regenerate. Both terms are often used interchangeably, and both are very common in helping professions and require regular self-reflection. Okay, I just read you these definitions, but here they are again. Right, got a cute video from Brene Brown on empathy that we're gonna watch.
I don't
I
hear
can't
any
hear it.
audio.
Yeah, there appears to be no sound for the video.
You may have to unmute your mic when you play the video.
Okay.
Okay.
You could see the video, but you couldn't hear it. Was that the issue?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we could see, but we couldn't hear anything.
Let me try.
I unmuted my mic. Maybe that might. I think Rawson suggested.
Okay.
So I'm trying to.
Let me try it again. 1 second. Sorry. Oh, I know why, because I didn't have shared sound clicked off for some reason. All right, this should fix it. Let me start it over. 1 sec. Everybody can hear and see?
Yes.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Such a cute video, right?
Right. And rarely does an empathetic response start with "at least." That was so prolific. Like, what? How many times have I tried to put a silver lining on something?
Yeah, you're like, damn it, I've done that.
Dang. Self-reflection, man.
Yeah. So I would argue that all of us here in this training are more empathetic than the average person because we all got into this field, right? So thinking about empathy. Yeah. Any other comments from that video?
I think it might be, sometimes it seems counter to what we're trained as professionals, right? Like we have to fix things right away. But I think that video was just kind of talking about sometimes it's just great to listen and to acknowledge what the person's saying instead of automatically always trying to look for a solution, you know. So yeah. I think that was a good point.
Me and Colleen were just talking about this before the training. And for me personally, I am, you know, I've always been very solution focused in my life. I mean, I love puzzles. You know, it's always been something very big. So how I've started training myself is I'll just ask them if they just need me to listen or if they want solutions, because left to my own devices, I am just going to vomit solutions because that's how I deal with my problems.
Right.
I find solutions. And so it's a good barrier because some of my friends are like, well, I just want to complain. And I'm like, they're all crap, right? You know, and it just kind of shake my system. But, you know, sometimes they think they appreciate that in their, at least the people that are closest to me, right? They list appreciate that in their chaos, that sometimes I can like come in and just be like, boom, try this. And, you know, but, you know, obviously for the clients, it's always a little different. And I do try to wait, you know, for that moment that they are calm to start offering solutions. Or if I do offer solutions while they're kind of still a little agitated, I kind of always follow it up. Like, is that all right with you? Is that okay? Because they may tell me no. And then that's when I'll kind of disengage and kind of back up and kind of help ground them a little more.
Yeah. Hard to just listen sometimes. I know as a supervisor, that's a hard one when staff are coming to me and saying, I need help, you know, I want to give them solutions, but I don't always have the best solution. They usually have a much better solution than me, but they can't arrive at that if I'm just spit firing solutions at them, right? Like I need to listen, need to kind of arrive there together maybe. Yeah. Back to the PowerPoint here. All right. Brandon, do you want to take this slide?
Of course. This is what the signs and symptoms of like burnout or compassion fatigue.
Yes.
So yeah, I felt all of these. Actually, I'm gonna even just start with, I guess, anecdotal. Like I felt all of these, and then in the beginning of February, I really noticed that as clients were calling me, as problems were popping up, I was getting a lot more frustrated. I was feeling anxious when certain clients would call. I was being short when I really shouldn't be. And thankfully, because this agency does operate on trauma-informed care on the interior of the agency as well, I told my supervisor that I needed to take a week off. I took a Monday to Friday off with like maybe 3 days notice. And she was like, you know what, go for it. I'd rather you take that time that you need now rather than half-ass it for another 2 weeks for kind of like a proper notice. So a lot of these do, difficulty separating work and personal life. When you start getting overwhelmed with that, you start consuming your thoughts every day. At the end of the, 4:30 is the end of our workday. If you're carrying a lot of these issues past 4:30, that's probably a good indicator. Feeling disconnected even when communicating, just kind of going through the motions. difficulty in relationships. And that could even just be how we connect and relate to our clients or colleagues. Inability, irritability, moody, anxious, anger, and frustration, all of those tend to tick up. Decrease things in the things that bring you pleasure. Health issues. A lot of this stuff can be, what's the word, psychosomatic? Did I use that right?
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. Yes, and I think with health issues, I worked in a hospital for many years and saw families taking care of their loved ones. So like their family member would get hospitalized after call, or and this their parent they've been taking care of their elderly parent for a long time, and the caregiver started developing health issues, right? Like they were in the hospital the week after with heart problems or digestive issues or whatever. So seeing health issues can definitely be a part of this.
Reduction in compassion, which is one that I do feel there's a few clients that drain my tanks a little faster than others. So, it's a really good barometer when I'm not feeling so compassionate. And a lot of my examples will be client facing because that's what I mostly deal with. Feeling like you have no time for yourself, not wanting to go to work, difficulty making decisions, exhaustion, fatigue, doubting your competence, impulsivity, and being very self-critical, which, that was kind of all of those I was feeling overwhelmed with in February. And I just needed to take that time off for myself. I literally did nothing. I got so bored of watching TV that I tried to think of different genres to watch because that's all I needed to do. Like it wasn't like a physical active thing. I just needed to shut off for a full week.
Yeah. What about for you all? What do you notice what are your signs when you're maybe moving into caregiver burnout or vicarious trauma?
I think in addition to these, one thing that I didn't see that I know I've experienced before is when I'm projecting the statistics from my work into random people on the street. Like there was a time, I know that one thing that I have a really hard time spending a lot of time with is child sexual abuse. And that's something that previously my job required me to spend some time with. And I would see kids on the playground and I'd be like, okay, there's 10 kids there, which 2 of them are being abused at home or something like that. And I just had to realize, whoa, that's really not healthy, that I can't keep that separate, and I had to figure out how to deal with that for myself.
Yeah.
I noticed that I become very less tolerant, like when other people who are not working in the field and I hear them say something that's less than caring or empathetic towards a certain population. I'm like, well, you don't know what other people are going through. And I tend to jump on more.
Yeah. It's a good example.
I think apathy. Apathy starts to set in. Like I just get numb to it. Like I notice myself not giving as much effort as I know I could be.
Mm-hmm. I think the fatigue sets in for me. I kind of start like I'm just tired of the whole process. Like I think Brandon's scenario is like a perfect example of self-care. And we come up with these self-care regimen. Well, I do, with these self-care regimens, and sometimes I just need more. So being able to check out and really like, I'm not doing anything for 3 days, or I'm not doing anything over the weekend, or, whatever the case may be, I feel like is a good self-care tactic, just so that you're not so tired. And I don't know, I feel like when you're fatigued, you're not really working at your best.
Yeah.
I don't have the energy to give to this scenario or to this client,
Yeah. And we're in an interesting time right now because we've all got the pandemic fatigue and Zoom fatigue, which when I first heard of those things, I'm like, whatever. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, they really are real. Like I feel so sick of Zoom and just that like inability to connect with someone. I can tell you for one, I'm so tired of doing trainings over Zoom. It's so hard. It's like you just can't connect with people in the same way. And it's just, I'm tired of it, you know? And so yeah, feeling that just like that fatigue, that physical and emotional fatigue, very real. Yeah. So the next part of this training is talking about what do we do with that when we notice signs and symptoms. So how do we take care of how do you take care of yourself? So here's a couple things, but then I'm gonna stop sharing and I want to hear what you all do because I'm sure you all have some tricks. But a couple things to think about trying if you're not doing this already is turning off the news. At least for a little bit every day, you know, finding a section of the day where you're not going to be infiltrating your brain with more trauma, finding space to do that. Taking a break, even if it's only 5 minutes, can make a huge difference. Engaging in physical activity, I think that one is so important for me when I'm feeling anxious or angry, or you're feeling one of those emotions where there needs to be that physical release. You know, if I'm feeling anxious or angry, usually if I'm going to try to like sit down and meditate, I'm not going to be able to do it until I have some physical release. Having a transition plan, I don't know if you all have heard of this before, but a transition plan from work to home. Way harder during this time when we're oftentimes working from home. So you're, you know, doing all your calls and then you're in your bedroom or in your living room. It's harder to have that transition plan, but figuring out what works for you so that when you turn work off, you can be present with what you're actually doing. Someone said once in a training that they had 2 different types of perfume. I always thought this was like so interesting. They were like, yeah, I have one perfume that I wear during the weekday and I have one perfume it's one scent that I wear during the weekend. And it helps my brain shift into, I was like, oh my gosh, so creative. Having friends outside of work. So not, you know, having friends that don't do the same work that you do is important. Getting outside, journaling, meditating, loved ones, focusing on accomplishments, starting a gratitude list, boundaries, asking for support, giving yourself permission to feel your emotions fully. So I think, Keisha, you were just saying, sometimes I do all my coping skills and it feels like it's not enough. I think we've all been there and kind of maybe just saying, okay, you know what? I feel like crap this week and I'm just going to let myself feel sad or I'm going to let myself feel stressed. It is what it is this week. Yeah. What are some other things that you all do to take care of yourself? What have you found to be helpful?
So like for me, I'm very much like structured and I'll have like, you know, I'm gonna do this with my son, I'm gonna do this and do this. But what I notice is when I just go astray from my structure, it gives me like this reset. Like I'll just throw something random in there with me and my son and then I'm like, all right, that reset me. Because I think we're kind of programmed to each day you're doing the same thing over and over. And then I just kind of get like burned out because I'm like, this is the same thing I do every day. So I think me just throwing something in there like fun or playing board games or just something that I didn't plan to do that day and just turning it into a pajama day, that's what me and my son call it, then it kind of resets me.
I love that. So true.
You know what else I think about? So a lot of the things on the list I actually do, like the meditation and, you know, go for a random walk instead of eat lunch, you know, stuff like that. But I also like to travel. So if I can have something to look forward to in regards to the break, I feel like, okay, I only have 2 more weeks or I only have 2 more months or, you know, it's almost like I'm going to reward myself at the end of this 4 months, you know what I mean? I'm going to be able to get on a plane and go somewhere or, do a little staycation in San Diego or whatever the case may be. But like having something to look forward to as far as a vacation or break, I feel like is important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I have a dog, so companion,
yeah.
you know, therapy animals, whatever you want to call it, emotional support. So it's unconditional. You know, they're not like humans.
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny.
They're happy to see you regardless.
Yeah, right.
I have plants instead of a dog. So it's like the same thing though. There's no, I don't know, maybe because they don't interact like that, but they do get happy. Like they flourish when they're loved type of thing, or when they're getting the right amount of nutrients or, you know?
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Totally.
It's not barking at me and, you know, I don't have to walk it.
They're a little quieter.
Right.
Yeah.
Mary, I'm so excited. I'm not very good at keeping plants alive, but I during Christmas I bought some, you know, because we were still kind of like stay at home. We didn't really get to see family during the holiday. So to liven up the house, I bought some poinsettias and they're still alive. And I'm like so proud of that. I know it's silly, but I'm so proud that they're still alive. They don't have like the flower, but the greenery grew much more like in abundance, and it's just so beautiful, and it brings me so much joy because I can't really keep plants alive.
That's awesome. You're a
That's
good
really
plant
cool.
caregiver. Yeah. Great. I'm going to share just 2 handouts that you should have already received if you didn't let me know, but one of them is this handout, top 12. It's always a mouthful to say this one. Top 12 self-care tips for helpers. So some other ideas for how to take care of yourself. And I'm going to share one more. You also should have received this handout for your wellness plan. So if you're someone that likes, also another resource that came from South Bay Community Services, if you're somebody that likes to write down a plan, you could do this. You can also share this with your clients or with your coworkers. Some of us like to write down our plan and have kind of a physical copy of it. There's also sorts of other resources out there too. All right, we're gonna watch one more short video. Looks like some of you may not have received the handout. So I will make sure to email you the PowerPoints and the handouts after today's session so you have those. We're gonna watch one more video on mindfulness. We'll spend a few minutes after that and then I'll get out of here so you can go eat lunch. Okay. Trying to get out of here. Let's see. There we go. Already watched that one. Sorry, one minute. The top is okay. Try again here.
You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, Don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you, rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. How do you get it? The way to get it is through meditation. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, who's chasing you? But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribes for you. Let me just close by saying, mindfulness is not going to solve all of your problems. It's not going to render your life a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. Nonetheless, this is a superpower and one that is accessible by you immediately.
Another cute video.
I love it. Love it, love it.
All right. Well, this brings us to the end of our training. Any last minute comments or things that anyone wants to bring up on that video or? Okay.
I love the way he described the evolution, like he sees it as, you know, it's going to be the next big thing type of.
Yeah.
I remember, and again, this might just be other people's bias or maybe my own, I don't know. But before I got into meditate, or when I say it, or when I speak on it, people kind of think about, I don't know, like witchcraft or something. I don't know what that is, but I may have had that thought back in the days before I was introduced to it. So I'm just glad that it's like widely accepted now, I guess.
Becoming more normalized in Western culture. Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of those things like I didn't know I needed it until I started doing it.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I need this. This helps. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you all for spending time with Brandon and I today. We really appreciate it. I will send you the PowerPoint and the handouts. I'm also working to get our survey electronic, so I'm going to try to send you a link to that as well. But have a great Monday, a great week, and pleasure spending some time with you today.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Brandon, I'm going to see you in a minute.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna probably heat up some food and then
Yeah.
do a working meeting.
Yeah. No, I need to eat. All right.
Thank you again.
See you there.